Yeah, welcome to my YouTube channel where I now upload at roughly the same rate as the show A Current Affair. It's because I'm largely set up to be able to talk about stuff related to my wheelhouse of anti-fascist things at a pretty regular rate. What's of interest to me though in terms of why I'm now doing a third part of a fascist groomer, looking at stuff related to Tom Sewell and his assault of a black security guard outside Channel 9's headquarters. A few other nationalists of note have weighed in and disagree with him. And I want you to know about that, because I want you to know about what I think is a pretty important fault line in discussions of nationalism. There's a difference here between what you might loosely describe as civic nationalists versus Nazis or ethnic nationalists. These are two different brands of nationalism, and they regularly tend to clash. I suppose that the dispute largely falls down to the group of civic nationalists saying to the Nazi lot, the ethnic nationalists, the white supremacists, saying, what you're doing is bad, it will create problems for us all, it's bad optics, and the normies are going to run away. They'll be scared of us. The ethnic nationalists tend to say back to the civic nationalists, you are optics cucks, as in you are so obsessed with the normie consensus and opinion regarding you and the way that you look in the media, that you're weak, you're a coward, will never be seen as palatable and acceptable until the prevailing political circumstance deteriorates to the extent that we're seen as the viable alternative, being as a lot of those Nazi types are kind of political accelerationists. And what we really need to do is be staunch, stick to our core politics, and organise accordingly. Just briefly, let's perhaps define a civic nationalist as someone who is beholden to the idea of a nation state and the importance of a nation state. But within that nation state, they believe that everyone, broadly believes that everyone is entitled to the same liberal rights, and that once you are committed to that nation state, then you all enjoy a degree of equality and freedom and liberalism. There are some strands, and you don't really see them among anyone that I would call the far right. There are some strains of liberal nationalism that really aren't on the nose. I don't think they're practical, and my personal take on nationalism is that the nation state itself is so inextricably tied in, in the popular and the political consciousness with race and supremacy and racism and what have you, that any discourse on nationalism always seems to inevitably head back towards ethnic supremacy, white supremacy, for example. And a national socialist, an ethnic nationalist, a white supremacist, they of course believe in order to be a member of that nation state you really need to be white, for example. Now these two strains really don't have much in common beyond agreeing that a nation state is a thing. In this argument, on the Nazi side, obviously, as we know, you have people like Tom Sewell, who's really not too fussed about optics and believes that circumstances will change to accommodate their politics, and that more and more people, if they just work tirelessly and hard, will eventually become more amenable to his message about white genocide. On the other side, well, we're going to get into some of the people on the other side. Those of you who are not as familiar with the up-to-date goings-on related to fringe nationalist activity in Australia, and why fucking would you after all? Jesus Christ, what's wrong with you? What's wrong with me?
What is wrong with me? Imagine if your best talent was being good at looking at shitheads.
You might be surprised to see this. You might have a faint memory of these two being hand in hand once upon a time. And it is true, Tom Sewell and Blair Cottrell at the time of, 16, 17, even earlier, the United Patriots Front were comrades arm in arm as they headed up the United Patriots Front together. However, they have had an ideological falling out, and you could broadly describe it as a civic nationalist versus ethnic nationalist falling out. Although, Blair Cottrell at his heart is a National Socialist, yes, but he has had leanings, I suppose, towards a broader concept or a more populist concept of the nation state, and that doesn't gel with Tom Sewell's hardline ethnic white supremacist neo-Nazism.
Right. Neo-Nazi race hate, including but not limited to skinheadery, KKK cosplay, and sea-piling neo-Nazi kids. It's not nationalism. It's certainly not National Socialism. Right? Proponents of this kind of neo-Nazi race hate, which, let's be honest, it's a Hollywood adaptation or appropriation / ideological expression of National Socialist philosophy designed to make people hate National Socialism. So why the hell would you embrace and carry that on unless you were trying to do harm to nationalism and anybody that's, trying to do good, positive nationalist community work? There's a reason why, for the past few generations, mainstream media corporations and established present-day governments around the world have worked very hard to make sure the public in the West sees in nationalism nothing but neo-Nazi race hate, whether it's there or not, right? And to anyone who says, oh, they're going to call us racist neo-Nazis anyway, so we might as well just be racist neo-Nazis. All right, so by that logic, you're smearing shit on yourselves just so they can't smear it on you. Let's be sensible. Let's be sensible. The aesthetic of nationalism right now is really bad. It's really bad, and it needs to improve. Even I don't want to be a part of it. Really? Sieg-hailing Nazi kids and chanting Ku Klux Klan and running around in masks? What the fuck? What the fuck, man? Yeah, so I hope this makes sense to you. I really do, because it's sad that I feel I have to say this. Because to me, this is common sense. It's really common sense.
I'm no fucking advisor to his movement, but I'd be inclined to agree with him. This is someone who, although he would never, I don't think he would probably admit it, has been at the head of enough failures to be able to play an advisor role to other nationalists. Let's get on to some of the other criticisms that we've seen of Sewell and what he did. From the Australia First Party site, we have an article called "If Tom Sewell Isn't Working for the State, He Might As Well Be." Australia First Party is run by Jim Salame, a self-appointed elder statesman of Australian nationalism. This particular article is written by Nathan Sykes. Let's go through it a little bit. If Tom Sewell isn't working for the other side, he might as well be. That's a comment we've heard in strict confidence from disillusioned ex-comrades of Sewell who won't be named. Having been around the traps as long as Thomas has, one might assume he'd garnered enough wisdom about how to handle himself as a public figure representing what nationalists argue is the misguided cause of National Socialism in Australia. He might have worked out that his theory about accelerating is more harmful to that cause than the heroic kudos he profits by allegedly being seen to beat down a large black man and challenging the propagandist vanguard at 9. They handed A Current Affair everything they needed to produce that piece. Their very existence enabled it. When a large group of uniformed youth are seen gathered at a campsite chanting Ku Klux Klan and Hail Hitler for whatever purpose or reason that served, it is media gold. The distinctions that the Australia First Party has in its favour when faced by such forces are not the possessions of this group, which has worried a lot of those in nationalist circles precisely because of its character and its lack of interest in a genuinely Australian cause. They are lost in a social media created world of young people who aren't informed, are motivated more by youthfully tribal factors. Sewell himself advocates for the kind of publicity being aired, which he had turned up to object to. He highlights it as a crucial means of increasing his support base, which I've covered in a previous, in the first part. He writes off those organisations which do not attract mainstream media notoriety. He writes off the importance of staying in that spotlight. Having said that, and given that all his comments and his group's behaviour are so patently calibrated to that end, what is it exactly he was to object to? He took his 2RC along to film it, to be able to present himself and the National Socialist Network as victims, exposing the lying Jew media. But they weren't engaged in any nobler an activity. So not only was it disingenuous, it was plain stupid, because all they did was provide the prosecution with free evidence. Next up, from the New Australian Bulletin website, this is a pseudonym, is Barry Spall, who's written it. If it's not either Jim Salam or Nathan Sykes, it's someone directly related to them. First up, the context of an alleged attack on the guard occurred amid a parliamentary inquiry. 2, to be precise, in Victoria, they're voting on whether to ban the swastika. In the federal parliament, they're investigating terror organisations, but with an obvious eye to the growing right-wing threat. We shan't comment on either inquiry's term of reference. Suffice to say that Sewell and his National Socialist Network have given the government all the ammunition they need. When Sewell allegedly struck that guard many times, he effectively placed the group on ASIO's list of proscribed organisations. The odds on the National Socialist Network making it onto that list are so short that it wouldn't even be worth betting on. They're gone. Sewell never did enjoy being in Blair Cottrell's shadow, and that much was apparent when the UPF in Fortitude, that was the attempted political party wing of the United Patriots Front, which they tried to get going in early to mid-2016 but didn't get enough signatures to register for. He was accused of being a civic patriot, civic nationalist. He bristled so badly at that, he chose to go to this absolute extreme to prove his credentials. Both he and Blair had an obnoxious habit of dismissing advice from seasoned activists. Blair dismissed everyone but himself, convinced that only he could lead Australia. Now, where is he? Living off his past notoriety on a large Gab following. He played up to the media, he allowed them to define him, and now he's a spent force, mistrusted by nearly all. Tom Sewell was probably worse. He had something to prove. Not a big man, he has nonetheless trained himself to the point that he probably outlived Blair in a challenge. That's nothing to be ashamed of, nor overly proud of, as it also means he has a chauvinistic attitude to the fitness of others, which makes him an exclusivist. His mentality is elitist, but the political struggle he chooses to fight is with cultism. No, he never listened to anybody. That was his greatest mistake. Sewell is onto his third organisation. He started with the UPF, then he created the Lad Society, but when that splintered due to his managerial methods, and this is pretty much why Blair Cottrell and him have fallen out, he aligned with Jacob Hersant, and the two established the National Socialist Network out of the remnants of the Lads and the Antipodeans. That was the Antipodean Resistance, who you may recall doing the same thing that the National Socialist Network up until recently was doing, which was just putting stickers up and, going for bushwalks. Both groups ran counter to nationalism and insisted on aping the very overseas groups being proscribed. Now, that's all really fun. I really enjoy reading. All that Nathan Sykes and Jim Salam do is whinge about other nationalists. And they're very entertaining in that sense. You can always find interesting whinges about other nationalists if you look at their online written content. That's all I think they're good for. But let's look at the history of those people, specifically Jim Salam and Blair Cottrell. Because you might ask yourself, who the fuck are they to talk about the problems with the optics of Tom Sewell? This you, bro? This is Blair Cottrell in mid-2018. So he would get very egomaniacal of a morning, and he would tweet things like this occasionally, which sounds pretty similar to the same kind of rhetoric you see coming out of Tom Sewell these days. Or how about stunts? You want stunts? Here's a still from a video from back in 15 or 16 of Blair Cottrell, Christopher Shortis and Neil Erickson at Bendigo Council protesting the upcoming mosque by beheading a doll to demonstrate the perils of what would happen when the Islams comes to Australia. That actually resulted in the first time that a criminal charge under Victoria's Racial and Religious Tolerance Act ever got to be flexed in court. They all got charged and fined for that one. And, I suppose in short, if we're to judge the merits of someone's activism or stunts by what happens afterwards in terms of legal responses, then we should say that everything that Blair Cottrell did was worse than anything Tom Sewell has yet done. And I guess the only point I'm making here, apart from, who are you to fucking talk, mate, is to say that Blair Cottrell, I'm trying to couch things in terms of a civic nationalism versus ethnic nationalism thing here. And we might have just seen a video of Blair Cottrell talking about being sensible. However, he's every bit the National Socialist and the racist, as in the ethnic supremacist that Tom Sewell is. He just believes in couching his nationalism in terms that are slightly more palatable to the pleb normies, so as to bring about a mass awakening of national consciousness. He thinks that the lessons of Adolf Hitler are far more optics-based than someone like Tom Sewell would ever believe. And that's their only disagreement here at heart. It's convenient for me to talk about civic nationalism, which is what Blair would seem to aspire to agitating for, versus Tom Sewell's National Socialism. But really, they're the same ideology. Blair just doesn't like regularly admitting it in public. And what's more, I'm not sure that Dr. Jim Salam or anyone associated with him really has the right to lecture Tom Sewell about the optics of their overboard physical transgressions. For example, Dr. Salam at age 17 attempted to firebomb a Maoist bookshop in Brisbane. What's more, and perhaps more pressingly, in 1989, Dr. Salam, not at that point a doctor, paid two boneheads with a bit of money and booze, as I understand it, to fire a shotgun into the house of African National Congress Australian representative Eddie Funde, for which he served 3 years in prison. That's right. They attempted to get someone to kill Mandela's representative in Australia. And I'm not sure that the man who did all of those things really gets the right to talk to Sewell about optics. So what's Tom Sewell said in response to that? Well, look, I can play 20 minutes of him talking about how the white man is being replaced and such, as he's always wanted to. And actually mentioning the whole narcissism thing that a current affair said to him quite a lot. Like, methinks he doth protest too much. In some way it got to him, I think, because he's just mentioned it a lot throughout his little Telegram response to this video. But he's talking about the optics cucks like Cottrell and the rest of them who'd, were wringing their hands over what he did. Just this brief clip of basically what he said in response.
We're abiding by the law. We've always abided by the law. But this is the game they play, and they glorify violence against us. They glorified violence against Richard Spencer when he was king hit, coward punched, whatever you want to call it, by a guy that had a spanner in his forearm, and he elbowed him and hit him in the side head and almost knocked him out, and used basically a deadly weapon to hit Richard Spencer while he was in the middle of an interview. And they glorified that. They played that on repeat. They loved that footage. They loved that Richard Spencer got his head caved in, and then Richard Spencer ran away and didn't even fight back. That's bad optics. That's bad optics. We were attacked and we showed strength, and that's honorable. That's good optics. And so anyone counter-signaling that, I would suggest that you need to grow some balls.
Why am I showing you all of this? Why a third part? I regularly get pissed off with the ignorance with which people generally perceive fringe nationalism in this country. The very building blocks of people's attitudes surrounding it. I think, it fuels the rise of grassroots nationalism. It gives them more people. I hate the snobbery with which soft centre lefties tend to regard matters of racism, nationalists. This whole idea that they're all stupid, they're all idiots. Racism is not about lack of education. It's ultimately about power. They have a huge pool of fascist theory and models of resistance to draw on. And you are very ill-placed to make any kind of judgment or call on the rise of those movements if you don't know anything about that stuff. And that's why I regularly, as in my last article that I wrote for Independent Australia, talked about how anti-fascism is the key to or a better understanding of good anti-fascism is the key to ending white supremacy, because, and it's not least of which is because people like myself, certainly not limited to, but people like myself and the network that I'm part of, will take the time to actually understand what the fuck these people are saying, not just to their followers, but to each other.
And then I'm constantly being asked by other people, many of whom seem to have the words anti-fascist written in their Twitter bios. What's going on with this group, or that fascist, or that white supremacist, or that alt-right figure who hasn't even been around for 2 years? And then I think to myself, well, is it me that's weird here? Am I odd for constantly looking at the goings-on of these flogs? This absolute detritus and filth, this pond scum. To be honest, I do like looking at fringe elements, and I'm probably best at looking at the ones that I don't happen to like. Maybe it beats standing in aisle 9, staring through the packets of chips into the great dark beyond, pondering the futility of all effort, wondering when it's all going to end.
If anything, I want you to be aware that this is a fault line before you open your mouth about these movements again. So that you're better placed to understand why it is that there's, what the difference is between, say, a UPF-style movement where the leaders may have hid their swastikas on the inside whilst agitating for more populist far-right measures or policies, versus something like this, which is of great concern to the more optics-inclined nationalists, as you've seen. So that's all for now. Again, as I said at the end of last time, hopefully that's all for the foreseeable future, because the last thing we want is more hysterical nationalist drama. It always seems to come with a price tag in terms of violence against one or two people, or an impact upon the popular rhetoric.